We have what promises to be a very fascinating conversation with Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool. He's going to be ambassador again to the United States after it was recently announced this week that the president wants Mr. Rasool to hit the ground running. They want a familiar face, somebody that understands the systems and, the parties in the United States to deal with a whole host of things that needs urgent attention. We'll talk a little bit about that and as well as, the move to the United States again by Ambassador Rasool, and indeed we have the pleasure to have him with us here in studio with Radio 786 this morning. Mr. Ambassador, assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for being here.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To you, Tashriq, to Radio 786 and all your listeners.
How did this happen? The president call you to say we need you to go back?
He asked the Minister of International Relations, Ronald Lamola, to phone me and basically to say that this is a call to national service.
Yeah.
Just prior to that, I had declined a place in Parliament, being candidate number 75 on the ANC list, and I really made a lot of istikhara, a lot of reflection on whether I wanted to go back to Parliament, Cabinet, whatever the case may be. And I thought that my life was in a very important phase. I was doing all the things I love doing. I was enjoying my work at the Development Bank of Southern Africa, making an impact on infrastructure like electricity and all of those kind of things.
Sport as well.
And some sport and all of those kind of things. And so I declined it. But when they came and said, listen, our relationship with the United States needs consolidation. It's in some kind of disrepair. We're trying to work our way out of it. I said, give me a weekend to consult my family, and then the next week we said, look, this is something that is probably quite important. We are familiar with the territory. We have worked both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
So maybe, inshallah, this could be my last contribution because the stakes are so high. So that's really how it's happened.
It's a difficult job to think about. Well, I mean, you're familiar with the territory, as you say, of this particular job, but you're flying into what could be perceived to be a very hostile political environment, and we'll get to that in just a bit, because I'm certain you have to think about how best to navigate all of that. So what happens after a call like this? So what you'd be easily, I suppose, to your credentials in terms of confirming that would be quite easy because you have served there before, and this would mean some bit of a relocation, family, etc., going to the States?
So there's a lot of administration
that
has to go. I had a top secret security vetting that lapsed 5 years ago, so you've got to go for all of those vettings again and so forth. They scrutinize your bank accounts to look for things in there. They ask you questions. They're going to put me through a polygraph test. So that's the security side. Then there is the side that goes to the administration. You've got to fill in for a diplomatic passport, a diplomatic visa to the United States. Alhamdulillah, my daughter and her husband will stay at our house. So this time around, I don't have to pack up the house like we did the previous times. So they will stay in the house. Rushida and I will depart early December, inshallah, and we will be joined by our son Tanweer, who will join us early next year, inshallah. So it's been a lot, but we still have to do some kind of packing, and we still have to work out what exactly awaits us from a logistical point of view when we hit Washington. Is the house the same? Is the office the same? Are the staff the same? So we'll work all of that out, inshallah.
How nervous are you for that polygraph test?
I've passed a few before, so for me the idea with a polygraph test is tell the truth. You can't beat the system.
But the truth sometimes could also be a little bit interpretive or subjective, in the sense that some may feel that your political opinion could influence whatever policy position they may or may not be needing to be argued. Of course, South Africa's position on Palestine and Israel is quite ventilated and well known. You have, outside of your ambassadorial duties, have also made, commitments and comments to a just cause on numerous occasions. For people on the other side of the aisle, that may well be deemed to be, if I put it mildly, controversial. How does one stay true to those ideas and thoughts whilst also trying to get on with country duty?
Look, I think that the point of the matter is that the one step I left out in explaining how we have reached to the point of the announcement by the minister that the president has appointed me is that the minister will not make such an announcement unless it has been accepted by the United States.
Okay.
So that has been, and they all know who I am. They know where I stand. I managed how the Arab Spring worked in my first term. They all know where I've been speaking in the United States at the Islamic Society in North America, the Muslim Association of Canada, CARE, and all of those kind of organizations. Right up till 2 months ago, I've been speaking in the United States. So everyone knows what I'm saying. I think what people want to know is that you are trusted to stay true to your opinion while doing a job for your country. And so I don't need to compromise what I believe in. I need to understand what instrument to use. As an ambassador, do I use a megaphone? Or do I use the art of engagement and persuasion? It is not saying different things. It is the different tone in which you say certain things, because now the object is to persuade. The object is to explain. The object is to clarify, to overcome misunderstandings. And that's in the best tradition of Islam, to use wisdom and the best teachings in order to achieve an objective.
The Business Day, I'm not sure if you've seen it, they're running an editorial today saying something along the lines of it's off to a good start to try and remedy relations between South Africa and the United States by redeploying yourself. They actually have an editorial dedicated to your redeployment. What does an ambassador actually do?
So an ambassador basically has 3 tracks on which an ambassador works. The ambassador has to manage, in Washington particularly, the bilateral political relationships, the geopolitical relationships in which your country is busy with. So that's the one track. The second one, which South Africa has historically been strong on, is the public diplomacy track, where we reach out to United States people. And we have a deep roots within the United States people coming from the anti-apartheid movements. So we work with all of those communities, and what I've added to it is, for example, the Muslim community. When I was there the last time, we've had very deep roots with the African American community and with your kind of liberal NGOs and all of those, all of who graduated into their political consciousness through the anti-apartheid struggle. And then there is the third track, which is absolutely critical. And that track is the economic diplomacy track. And that track is so critical because every year there's $22 billion worth of trade through AGOA. Every year there is $50 billion worth of investment in South Africa through 600 US companies employing 250,000 South Africans. That track is absolutely critical to the well-being of our people, and therefore it's not often the most visible track, because that is, you have visibility with the first 2 tracks in order to secure the third track. So that's the 3 jobs of an ambassador in a society.
It seems very multifaceted and all moving parts all at the same time to achieve a common objective, as it were. How does one then wrestle what many in the media have speculated to be a hostile Congress that you're going to be approaching? One that ended its previous term with some senators and lawmakers coming up with draft bits of legislation that calls for a review of relations between Washington and Pretoria based on what they believe is the non-alignment of American interests with those of the South Africans. Now, of course, there may be other reasons for why, bits of legislation like that had surfaced. But how do you walk into that space knowing this is where the conversation is at?
I think that South Africa, having inherited the mantle of what I call a moral superpower, in the sense that we fought a heroic anti-apartheid struggle, even when the United States called Nelson Mandela a terrorist, amongst others. We had a admirable transition when everyone thought that there was going to be bloodshed. We had the first generations of governance under people like Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki as being exemplary and smooth. And then we had corruption, but then we didn't deny the corruption. We exposed it further, although we didn't do too much. And then the ANC lost power, accepted it, and formed the government of national unity. So all of that speaks about a remarkable morality within South Africa, even in our mistakes and our missteps. So that's what South Africa represents, and that often does not always accord with US policy. So we have these misalignments all the time, but you need presence in the United States to explain it, to clarify it, to avoid misunderstandings, to say, yeah, the line isn't there, the line is there. Like we did with the Arab Spring, when we supported it, and they, for example, eventually supported the coup d'etats, the counter-revolutions. In that, South Africa, they knew we were on opposite sides, but they understood South Africa as a resource that still gave them insight and access to what was happening in the Arab Springs, etc. They still trusted us to be a voice that explained Islamophobia even when they were practicing it. So those, but the key thing is you've got to be present. You've got to be there. You've got to be able to explain. And I think that we have faltered at that level over the last few years, reaching a level of but there are also people with agendas on the other side. No one will dislodge the United States from their relationship with Israel. Not Mohammed bin Salman, and certainly not Ebrahim Rasool or Cyril Ramaphosa. But you've got to work with that reality.
Because the world looks different since 2011 Syria, at that time, comparable to where it is right now. And not just the world looking different, South Africa, as a player in this chess game, is a lot more present and is a lot more visible in regards to not only just having brought an International Court of Justice application, but also its misunderstood position on, for instance, Russia and Ukraine, for that matter. And purely just on those two issues, it seems that there is a misalignment that I'm wondering, do you then find a path to explain, or do you say in the process, this is what we feel strongly about and we're not going to compromise?
So it's very interesting to deal with both of them. The first one, let's use the issue of Palestine. It is very interesting that just before the minister announced my candidature, my appointment to Washington, in that press briefing, he said, we have just submitted our memorials to the International Court of Justice with all the evidence about why Israel has committed genocide in Palestine, and we are preparing the legal teams to go and present and defend our positions, and we're looking for a favorable. And he also pushed back on the idea, the misinformation that Iran, for example, was sponsoring our court case in the International Court of Justice. So it's very clear the minister could have been silent about it before announcing me. But the minister chose to say, this is the condition on which Ambassador Rasool will be coming there. This is an unshakable position. What it means now is that we have rested our case, because South Africa had to rise to the occasion, because the Palestinian neighbors were silent for whatever reasons. So someone had to stand up for the Palestinians, and after weeks of silence, South Africa did that, and suddenly South Africa captured the imagination, and we had to. The question now is, we need to now have our lawyers take on that matter. Our civil society here in South Africa must continue to put pressure.
Yeah.
But the government needs to now rest its case, have it won in the ICJ, take it where it must go. But it means that we don't have to use the megaphone as a government any longer. We need to use the legal platform in order to win the case. Because there are also values attached to 31% of our population being unemployed. There's also values attached to whether 20,000 orange farm workers lose their jobs because we can no longer export oranges to the United States under AGOA. There's also values attached to, for example, Ford workers losing their jobs if there's disinvestment from if those senators succeed.
Yeah.
So I think we need, as a government, and myself as the government's representative, we need to have a whole dashboard of values that we say, okay, we have done this much on those values in Palestine. We're going to push it through legally now, but we also now need to keep the other side of the values in mind and fight for the interests that are able to. The same thing with Ukraine. We must put it to the United States, and I feel this is where I think President-elect Donald Trump's transactionality will come through. He again announced we must stop the Ukraine war very quickly.
Yeah.
So the point is, he's not ideologically invested in the Russia-Ukraine thing, nor was South Africa. Russia isn't the Soviet Union that helped the ANC. They're just another country. They have less than 2% trade with us. So we don't go to fight a war about Russia, let alone have arms to give them. So the point of the matter is, we said we are non-aligned. We're not taking sides. That doesn't mean we are neutral with values. But the point of the matter is that what we did say...
It's such an interesting point you're making. We're non-aligned. We're not in the pockets of Russia, but it doesn't mean we have values. And on those values, which of course would be that we don't think wars are in any way fashionable, reasonable, or affordable, and there's a whole host of other values that one can build in there. It is those values that will determine what our position is.
Absolutely. And so our debate would be, if you've won the Cold War, do you need to surround Russia?
Yeah, or Iran for that matter.
Or Iran for that matter, or anyone for that matter with NATO basis.
Yeah.
How did the United States react when the Soviet Union wanted to put a missile base in its allies' backyard in Cuba?
Yeah.
So the point is, think back to 1962 and you can understand South Africa's position in 2024 or 2023. And that's the simple... You see, the point of the matter is, and Surah Rahman tells us, that Allah has created us with a capacity for intelligent speech. We've got to be able to be logical, put our emotions aside, and put a clear, logical, reasonable case on the table. And inshallah, that's what diplomacy has to be about.
And it seems, do you feel that from 10 years ago to now, the next couple of weeks, when you jet off to the United States, and you're having to be the embodiment of that particular diplomacy, how do you get around a Republican, House that is, buoyed by the election outcomes, where even if you look at some of the President-elect Trump's appointments that he's making, and I won't put you in a difficult position to comment on their domestic politics, as it were, but nonetheless, some of those appointments that we're seeing seem pretty wild at the moment, and I'm wondering whether there's room for sanity in all of this.
Look, I know you don't promote poker. But in poker, you play with a hand you've been dealt, not the one you wish for. So we're being dealt a set of wild cards to use your... But we've got to play with it. We've got to make the best of it. And so I'm very fortunate that I was in the United States from 2010 to 2014 as ambassador. For the first 2 years, 2010, 2011, and half of 2012, I was working with a Democratic White House, a Democratic State Department, a Democratic Congress, and a Democratic Senate. By 2012, only the White House and the State Department was Democratic. The Congress and Senate were Republican. And it was that crucial period that AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, was being reviewed. And together with other African ambassadors, and they trusted me a lot to present their case, we actually won the case in a Republican House because we shifted. That's the important thing. We shifted our narrative and our language from a solidarity language. Please help us. You have supported us in the anti-apartheid movement. Please continue to develop our people. Our people are poor. To a language of transactions. If you buy our oranges, you drink orange juice whole year round. There's no seasonality when Florida and California no longer produce it. If you buy our BMWs that we manufacture in South Africa, you get it tariff-free, duty-free, and it is cheaper for the American public to buy it because there are no duties that come from buying a German car from Germany. And so the language, and they began to see, and when they tried to suggest that South Africa mustn't be part of AGOA, we said, you know what, when you take South Africa out, you hurt Africa because the rubber on the tires for the BMW comes from the DRC. The leather for the seats of the BMW come from Botswana. And so we could say how the alloys came from different parts of Africa. So if you reject the BMW, you are hurting the economies of the rest. So do you see how you shift the language from solidarity language to transactional language? And that's how we survive. So I'm hoping that there is that kind of language that we are able to persuade with, inshallah.
Do you think that message still holds true in the current set of hostility that we see? And look, I don't want to just focus on the negative stuff, but the reality is that there is a review on AGOA, and it is clear from Minister Lamola's press briefing this week that they believe you're the guy that could potentially try and save it. Do you go with that same sort of messaging?
No, because I think what has changed over the 10 years is that we do now live in a far more populist era. People work with fear and ignorance a lot more. Secondly, we live in a post-truth era. People can tell untruths and get away with it. Thirdly, we live in a hyper-emotional era. Rationality doesn't always... It's true for the Muslim community. It's true for South African communities. It's true for the American communities. So those three changes make a simple shift of language more difficult than it has to be. And maybe what I bring to the table is a history, but also an awareness, because I have been operating globally. Through the World for All Foundation, I have understood the changes of the world. I have been working with Muslim communities globally to prepare them for why Islamophobia is going to not be real but grow, and how we need to adjust ourselves to that reality rather than wish that reality will change to accommodate us. And so I go with that awareness. I'm not saying it is a guaranteed success, but at least because I'm aware of it, inshallah, I'm hoping that I can navigate it a bit more. And maybe, and this is the point that I will make on this, maybe I still have enough friends who have over the last few days contacted me from Washington, Republicans and others, to say, your job is very difficult. If you need help, come and press our button, because we are willing to. And maybe that's the resource that Minister Lamola thinks that I can mobilize, and I don't come there as a stranger.
I've heard when the debate around AGOA was happening, there were some in South Africa that says, just drop the bloody thing. Why do we need it? Because with it comes, kowtowing to American interests, as it were. Let's leave the American interests and the politics aside for now. What is the actual value of AGOA to South Africa?
I've briefly mentioned some key statistics. There's 4,000 plus items that can enter AGOA very easily based on that African Growth and Opportunities Act. South Africa sends the most items, over 2,000 items a year, to the United States, duty-free. I've mentioned 30,000 tons of oranges a year. I've mentioned BMWs. I can mention medical nuclear isotopes, where we take the nuclear bombs that we defused and we send that as cancer treatment to the United States. And so I can go on with products from mining to agriculture, etc., etc. But plus 2,000 such products go, and their value every year is about 22 billion US dollars worth of goods that we export there, and it enters the US market. There are 600 US companies operating in South Africa, from automotive to pharmaceutical to mining to agriculture, and therefore they employ to the value of 250,000 South Africans. Now that's families saved from poverty that they do. Let me also tell you the difference between our exports to the United States and our exports, for example, to China.
Okay.
70% of what we export to the United States are manufactured. They are value added.
So that's jobs we're talking about.
That's jobs. Just imagine, for every BMW, it may employ 20 workers. One piece of coal that we mine and send to China, it's not even close.
Yeah.
So 80% of our exports to China are raw.
Yeah.
What South Africa needs for its industrial revolution is investment to add value to our minerals.
Yeah.
To our fruit.
It's a fancy term called beneficiation.
Beneficiation is the operative term, and that's what we need to go and search for in the United States. Investors who are prepared to beneficiate. And to leave you with this thought, Tashriq, is that South Africa and Africa possess the bulk of the critical minerals that the world needs for its technological revolution. No cell phone works without critical minerals. The batteries revolution to store electricity runs on the critical minerals that we have in Africa, and we need to make a deal with the United States. We have what you want, you have technology and know-how that we want. What is the transaction between us, so that you add the value here? You don't take our minerals and add the value and make jobs in the United States, but you can get access to our beneficiated minerals and
goods
so
and
forth.
Services that come from the air. We are talking to Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool. He's due for another stint in the United States as South African ambassador to Washington. He's just been recently appointed and announced by Minister Ronald Lamola, Minister of International Relations, and of course the minister was quite clear that the president particularly wanted Ambassador Rasool to serve on account of his experience and the knowledge and the friends that he has in Washington to particularly move South Africa's interests forward and remedying some of the challenges that we sit with at the moment. Ambassador, some of those challenges relate to United Nations and the permanent seat issue. Recently, it seems the United States moved a little bit in that they were open to representation on the Security Council, but it wasn't quite a permanent seat, to which South Africa and others on the continent said, no, we're not interested in that. It is a full seat, permanent representation, or nothing. How complicated are those negotiations, and with whom do you negotiate for something like that?
So, the interesting thing that's also happening this year in December is that South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, takes over the presidency of the G20 from Brazil.
Yeah.
Brazil took it over from India. India took it over from Indonesia. 4 years in a row, the Global South will lead the G20, and it is expected that South Africa completes some of the work. The most important work that the Global South wants to do is the reform of the global architecture. That's a fancy term. How do we change the United Nations Security Council? How do we change the World Bank, IMF, so that it is more representative, equitable, and responsive to the Global South? So we've understood we can't cry every time there's a veto in the Security Council on Palestine. We can't condemn every time. We've got to rather put our efforts at changing it at source. So we were beginning to get a breakthrough. I think we should prepare for a bit of a setback on that ambition. But I do think, and that is why it is absolutely critical. I know that people think you shouldn't be speaking to the United States. You can't make a deal with the devil, etc., etc. But the point of the matter is that when so much of the world depends on what impunity that devil has, even Hamas understands that it may need to speak and has spoken to the Israeli state simply to save lives and to get food in, and so forth. In the same way that we need to understand that we need to persuade people to be able to change the architecture, make it more representative, get Africa. Africa should also have a veto if a veto must exist. There's no reason for other vetoes to exist. Or maybe we should just have an open vote. Those are the things that I think we need to win if we are going to bring relief to people in the Global South wherever they are suffering.
Just on the score, and I'll push you a little bit on this one, that some say that this pragmatism that you say that is required, that it's too ideological to say dump AGOA when there's so many jobs at stake. It's impractical to sometimes take positions that seem progressive, but in its application you need a little bit more politics to make it work. But sometimes there's a feeling among South Africans that we compromise too much, or sometimes we are not as vociferous about ensuring that our own sovereignty is protected from an economic perspective, as well as when we do, for instance, and let me phrase it in this way, that we go to the ICJ, we spend a whole lot of money with lawyers, arguing what is a moral case essentially, and our position on Palestine is very, very clear and all of that, yet we have trade that happens between South Africa and Israel, in particularly the coal space. Now, for me, and as I've been thinking about this, it is a little bit tricky, and I don't want to prepare your answer for you, but the deals that you are facilitating are largely deals that are going to be operating business to business, from country to country. It's not necessarily facilitated always through a political lens, as it were. But it does raise for South Africans, the question is, how can you be, so pro-Palestinian when coal continues to, for instance, flow in that direction? And to use that as an example for being a little bit sometimes less pragmatic and more standing on the principle.
I think that there are balance of forces and balance of power that have to be weighed up. The Prophet ﷺ could have stood absolutely on principle that he is Rasulullah. He could have stood on absolute principle to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. He could have stood absolutely on the terms of the agreement, but he had a sense of that even though they could have won the battle that day, they may not have won the war. And therefore he chose to win the war, the Fathul Makkah, and make in the short term the necessary adjustments to it. So that's the paradigm that I think we need to understand. And I think South Africa is not uncommitted in the battle to stop the genocide. It has gone far further. It has gone to the brink of being kicked out of AGOA. It's gone to the brink of sanctions and so forth. And so the point of the matter is that what we need to be able to do is to also consider the values that I think are attached to the poverty in this country, the unemployment in this country, and so forth. And diplomacy is not the trade-off of values for interests. It is the balancing of values and interest. And I think that South Africa will always stand on its values, and hence the idea of the ICJ and pushing the case and winning it. But South Africa can't be man alien. There has to be pressure on other countries to ease the intimidation and the pressure that South Africa is facing at this moment. And I think the very same people who may want us to go all out on one thing will be the first people to abandon us when the country goes. We couldn't manage 4 hours of load shedding. Just imagine that things fall apart in this country. We complain about potholes. Just imagine we don't have a budget for roads any longer, etc. So I think we have to walk on both feet, and we need more countries to come to the party. Otherwise, South Africa is an easy target to be picked off by those in power.
Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool is with us just for another couple of more minutes. He is, of course, has a very busy schedule, and so we'll take your WhatsApp messages in just a bit. I want to pivot a little bit away from the international duty stuff and hear your commentary on a couple of months now since the GNU. I recall we last met and we took some photos on the footsteps of the union buildings at the inauguration of President Cyril Ramaphosa. At that time, we didn't quite know what was going to happen in terms of how the formation of a government was going to come together. And in later weeks, we came to know, of course, the ANC was talking about a GNU type of setup in which parties needed to join, and the president formed this cabinet. There's been some misgivings and challenges along the way, debates around pieces of legislation and so on. But I want to pick up on what Helen Zille had to say, and Tony Leon recently entered into the fray as well, saying that the ANC fought very hard to hold on to the international relations portfolio. That was almost a red line for the ANC, that it wants to keep international relations. Zille went on to claim that it's because there are questionable regimes that are flowing money towards the ANC. You now play again in the space of international diplomacy, and invariably, part of your principles are the international relations department. How do you view these chatters about the GNU and this particular portfolio that the ANC wanted to hold on to?
Let me first say that I think the GNU is a very important outcome of a failed election for the ANC. Secondly, the GNU has inspired confidence, and that's why one is getting economic indicators. The rand is strengthening, interest rates can come down, inflation is getting under control, investment prospects look better, and the way in which we present to the rest of the world is looking much better. It's not an ideological government because there's no shared ideology, but it can be a technocratic government. Let's just get things right and working again. So that's the first thing. So I've got nothing against the GNU. Let me say, secondly, the GNU does have its Cold War warriors. You've mentioned two on the right. I can mention people in the South African Communist Party, COSATU, and so forth, who are the Cold War warriors on the left, but the middle has to hold. And that, I think, is absolutely critical, and we must not be diverted by what we're hearing from the Cold War warriors, because they don't want that result. They want total victory on both sides. The third thing that I want to say is that I think that that it is right that there are portfolios that the ANC would not give. it won't give finance because that's a directive portfolio. It situates the budget for the country. It is right that international relations can't be given away because America's enemies can't be our enemies. So we are not into the business of isolating Iran because what Iran means to the USA is not what Iran means to us. Iran was an ally when we were fighting apartheid. We may not agree with everything about Iran, but it's not our enemy. And so when I went to the interbank meetings of development banks, we had a bilateral with the Iranian Development Bank. And so we can't. The other aspect of it, the ANC was not going to give up the ICJ case. Imagine we had given the portfolio to someone else. That would have been the first thing that would have been ended. We've now gone further and we've now submitted our memorials for the ICJ. So I think that there are aspects of international relations that I think are just germane to South Africa. That's what we need to be able to do. So I concede that they are right. We didn't give it up, but not for the reasons that they say. We don't need money from Iran to fight the ICJ or whatever the case may be. We will do that. It is the quality of the geopolitics that I think we want to win.
Well, the budget clearly showed that the taxpayer is paying for it. So there's no scenario that, or at least there's no public, backing of a claim here that the Iranians are funding the ICJ case. Explain to us in the 5 or so 7 minutes that we have left with you. What is BRICS and BRICS Plus now? It's been very clear, and even President Putin has been saying this, that we're not anti-West. You forced us out of the SWIFT system. You told us to go trade in our own local currencies, etc. BRICS is consolidating, but it's not anti-West in its nature, as it were. How do you understand what BRICS is and how it works?
So let me say firstly that BRICS is an amalgam of emerging markets, developing economies. When we come together with BRICS, we are part of the global south, but we have interests such as how do we develop our economies as a global south, and how do we strengthen our voice, because we can't speak one country to the United States, one country to Britain. We need to speak as a collective, and it's like a trade union of emerging markets. Under BRICS, there is another arrangement called IPSA, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Those are emerging democracies. Some countries of BRICS come together under IPSA and we discuss issues of human rights, of politics, of geopolitics, because we share those values with them. So we know that when we in BRICS, we speak economy. When we in IPSA, we speak politics. That's the arrangement. But BRICS is turning out to be a bit of a threat to the West, because suddenly with the expansion of BRICS, we have 40% of the world's population. We have 33% of the world's GDP. We have 60% of the world's energy, all under one arrangement. And that is maybe scary for other countries. Although we all trade with them, those that they want to trade with in BRICS. It doesn't make a distinction whether Iran should be in it or whatever, as long as you're an emerging market, and we'll expand it. So I think that there is misunderstanding about what BRICS is, and we've got to clarify it. But I also think that what I think countries like the United States may actually fear is that BRICS may be the beginning of the birth of a multilateral world. Since 1989, the world has been unipolar. And the United States used its unipolarity for unilateralism. It made war when it wanted to. It pulled the world into conflict when it wanted to. And suddenly, you have the emergence of BRICS. And so suddenly the idea is, okay, maybe the unipolar world is giving way to a multipolar world. At least it starts off with a bipolar world. And that's the fear. And we need to say, no, we'll continue. We don't share enough values in BRICS to present that threat to you, but we can begin to bargain with you economically.
Yeah. Two last questions. Let's deal with the one about what you think of the Muslim community and leadership at the moment. Gaza and the genocide has led the world to look a little bit differently. There was a big push for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. At the same time, there are misgivings about who presents what interests, whether the Muslim leadership in the community is strong enough and as a moral leader in society. As you begin to temporarily leave us again, and having spent some time locally, what is your impression about where we're at?
I think if you're speaking about the global ummah, I think it is fragmented. The response to Gaza shows it. The way in which some other Muslims have assisted in the defenselessness of Palestine, the way in which we fragmented because we would rather go one way than go with Shias, etc., I think speaks about a fragmentation in the global ummah. The fact that South Africa, a country with 2% Muslim population, that South Africa had to stand up in the ICJ and all the demands are made on South Africa to finish that job, I think is not necessarily a talk about South Africa's strength. It's a talk about the ummah's weakness. And so I think that from South Africa we have mobilized parts of the Western Ummah. Yeah. We have seen Muslims stand up in America, lead marches in London, defend in Amsterdam, etc., etc. We have seen the global Muslim diaspora, the minority Muslim community stand up. What have we seen in the heartlands of Islam? And so the point of the matter is, and I'm not just speaking about the governments.
Yes.
I think I'm speaking also about the population. We have seen us having easy boycotts, and we should, on Coca-Cola and so forth. But those same people will take their last money and go on Umrah. So the point of the matter is that that we are dealing with a very, very weak and fragmented ummah. I can't see a logical leadership that emerges. Muslim responses to the elections in the United States was also fragmented, and was often fragmented based on their ethnicity. African Americans went Democratic. Arab Americans went Trump. Not all, but generally, and others chose a third party like Jill Stein. I don't think that there is a brain's trust, that there's a leadership core that gives direction. I think that's the case there. I think it's the case here in South Africa, and I think it's the case in the global ummah as a whole. Lots of work to be doing, alhamdulillah. That is a task beyond my lifetime, but we can make dua, inshallah, that there's a moment of realization that will come to the ummah, that we can, and no amount of emotionalism will rectify what is at its heart an intellectual weakness within the ummah. The how we read the Quran and how we utilize the hadith, etc. We can use it for good purposes, but we can also sometimes use ahadith as bullets against each other.
Which is a terrible tragedy, as it were. On a lighter but separate note, I'm not even sure whether you have time to watch Netflix, but have you ever watched this series called The Diplomat?
Just finished it. I wanted to finish it before I go.
Show, right? How real is that based on the life that you live?
No, I don't think the South African ambassador
is that colourful.
Gets too involved, sits with the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister. You see, that is what gives American diplomats their disproportionate sense of power.
Okay.
Because in the Arab states, an American ambassador can go to the palace whenever they need to. But that's not the case here in South Africa. That's not the case of South African ambassadors there. But I watch it. It's highly entertaining.
It was.
And
And especially the way it ended, because now the president is. Oh, we're not give spoilers.
no, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of a cliffhanger. I don't want to do a spoiler alert thing, but I mean, it just sets up the next season.
Yeah.
So I may have to watch it in Washington.
Mr. Ambassador, all of the very best, inshallah. Almost all the messages are very positive and wishing you well, saying you're the man for the job, and it's going to be a tough job.
And inshallah, I think the skeptical ones I've tried to incorporate my responses to.
Inshallah. And
I
so
may not have satisfied them, but I did attempt. Acknowledge
Indeed.
it.
We wish you all of the very best. Let's touch base from time to time and see how things are going. And so a couple of weeks to go till you move and everything. So our thoughts and prayers are with you, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair.
Big
Tashriq,
boots and everything.
Thank you very much to you. Thank you very much for all the listeners and people in the community who have wished me so much well, and even the criticisms. I am very very happy to take that into advice. But thank you very much, and may Allah keep all of us and bring unity and direction to the Ummah, inshallah.
Inshallah. Shukran very much. That Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool with us this morning for a very brief conversation, as of course he jets off back to Washington to serve once again as Ambassador of South Africa to the United States.